Morning. You're muted. Good morning.
Good morning, ma'am.
Good morning.
So we were learning about the central nervous system, right? And we started with the brain, the three divisions of brain: hindbrain, midbrain, and forebrain. We were learning particularly about forebrain, and I think we ended with cerebrum, isn't it? Yes. So I'm going to share the screen. Okay, cerebrum. As you can see in this picture, cerebrum occupies the major part of the forebrain. Okay, this area, and yesterday in that slide I told you, see, makes 2/3 of total mass of the human brain. Not only the forebrain, but the whole brain. When we consider the whole brain, the 2/3 of it is, or 2/3 of its mass, the whole mass is occupied by this cerebrum. And it is also known as cerebral cortex. So when we learned about the thalamus, I told you thalamus is a what station? Thalamus is a
Relay station.
relay station. Thalamus is a relay station. So what happens is any message or any information that is passed on through the nervous system, it will come to the thalamus, then it will go to the cortex. That is, sensory information will come to the thalamus, it will be sent to the cortex for processing. From the cortex again, motor signals will reach the thalamus, then it leaves the thalamus to different parts of the body, muscles and glands. Okay, that's why it is called a relay station. Now there I told you the cortex means another part of the forebrain which we'll learn later. Okay, that cortex is this one, cerebral cortex. Okay, it is also known as cerebral cortex, cerebrum or cerebral cortex. Don't confuse cerebrum and cerebellum. Cerebellum is the part in which part of the brain? Hindbrain, midbrain or forebrain? Cerebellum.
Hindbrain.
Hindbrain. It is one of the structure in hindbrain with a wrinkled structure, wrinkled surface. Okay. So this part regulates all higher levels of cognitive functions. All higher levels of cognitive functions. You just don't write cognitive functions. You have to mention all higher levels of cognitive functions. Okay, the main thought processes, all the cognitive functions, the higher order thinking skills, everything is dealt with by the cerebral cortex. Okay. Then its thickness varies from 1.5 mm to 4 mm, which we already saw in the last class. Now, yes, I hope you know about the left and right hemispheres of the brain, isn't it? Yes. So the major cerebrum part, it is divided into two hemispheres. Hemispheres means a half of a sphere. Okay, so one is called right hemisphere, the other one is called left hemisphere, the right and left hemispheres. See, when we look from the other angle, it looks like this, the left and right hemispheres. Okay. Now, according to various studies, the left and right hemispheres of the brain, they are supposed to play important roles in these functions. For the left brain or for the left hemisphere, it's basically these. It's related to scientific and mathematical knowledge. Okay. The right side one is related to arts, artistic ones. So people who have dominance in the right brain, that means they'll be more artistic, they'll be more creative. Imagination and all will be higher for them. And for those with dominance of left brain or left hemisphere of the brain, they'll be more logically oriented or mathematics. They have higher mathematics and all. Okay. Was unmuted. Okay. You don't have to study much about it, but still note these terms and understand. Okay, so this one will be related to science and maths. Science and mathematics. Here, more orientation is towards arts, imagination, creativity, and so on. Okay. Then we start with the both of the hemispheres. The cerebrum is divided into two symmetrical halves. Okay, it's not unequally divided, but it's symmetrical halves, two symmetrical halves, that is cerebral hemispheres. If you are asked to name two cerebral hemispheres, you have to write left hemisphere and right hemisphere. Okay, although the two hemispheres appear identical, functionally, one hemisphere usually dominates the other. So usually, it is a general fact that one hemisphere of our brain, that is either the right hemisphere or the left hemisphere, will be dominating the other in the function. The structure might be more or less the same, but the functions might differ. Dominance of functions might differ among the left hemisphere and right hemisphere. Okay. For example, the left hemisphere usually controls language behavior. Language is also one part. Left hemisphere, L and L. Language, left hemisphere. And deals with mathematics, the scientific knowledge, logical thinking, critical thinking, all those things. The right hemisphere is usually specialized to deal with images, spatial relationships, and pattern recognition. That is creativity and art, basically. Okay. Now, I'll just show the previous picture. See here, these left and right hemispheres, they are connected by something. They are not just floating in the brain. Okay, they are not floating parts of the brain. See, here there is a connection between the left and the right hemisphere. And I think you guys have learned that before. It's called the corpus callosum. That structure is called the corpus callosum. Note the name. The two hemispheres of the brain, that is the left as well as the right hemispheres, they're connected by a structure called corpus callosum that carries messages back and forth between the hemispheres. It's like a bridge between the left and the right hemisphere. Okay. And what is corpus callosum? It is a white bundle of myelinated fibers. White bundle of myelinated fibers. Where have you heard of myelin sheath and myelinated fibers? Where have you heard of myelinated fibers? Myelin sheath and all.
A myelin sheath is in the structure of a neuron.
Structure of neuron, yes. So here it is, white bundle of myelinated fibers. Corpus callosum. The two hemispheres, that is left and right hemispheres, they are connected by a white bundle of myelinated fibers known as corpus callosum. Completed? Okay, now the next one. See, this is the structure of corpus callosum. This green colored part that you can see. It is given in green color to easily identify. Okay, it occurs in a kind of whitish grayish color. Okay, which is the structure? Which is the structure? What is it called?
Cerebellum.
Cerebellum. This is cerebellum. Okay. What about this part?
Medulla oblongata.
Medulla oblongata. And this part? Starting with P.
Pons.
Pons. Yes. Okay. So this is the corpus callosum, and this is the connection between left hemisphere and the right hemisphere. So the basics about cerebrum is over. Now the cerebrum is divided, or the brain is divided. Generally we say brain is divided into lobes, 4 lobes. Okay, frontal lobe, parietal lobe, occipital lobe, and temporal lobe. There is no exact division between these these parts of brain, but they are considered as different lobes because they have certain specified functions. It's not that suppose for auditory function we have a particular lobe. The main role is played by that role, but it doesn't mean that the other lobes do not have or do not help in that function. Okay, they have connections, so one lobe is dependent on the other, but the main functions are done by a particular lobe of the brain. Okay, so we'll see the different lobes of the brain. Cerebral cortex has also been divided into 4 lobes. These are the names. Please take down the names: frontal lobe, parietal lobe, temporal lobe, and occipital lobe. Frontal, parietal, temporal, and occipital. Frontal, parietal, temporal, and occipital lobe. Okay. See, these are the 4 lobes: the frontal lobe, the parietal lobe, occipital lobe, which is present on the back side of the head, temporal lobe on 2 sides, just nearby our ears. Okay. So frontal, parietal, occipital, and temporal. Don't confuse the spelling of occipital. It's OCCIPITAL, occipital. Okay, so let's see the functions. So here we have frontal lobe, parietal lobe, temporal lobe, and occipital lobe. Frontal lobe is mainly concerned with cognitive functions. Okay, cognitive functions such as attention, thinking, memory, learning, and reasoning. But it also exerts inhibitory effects on autonomic and emotional responses. Remember, I told you about when we talked about the cerebrum, I told you majority of the cognitive functions, it's carried out by the cerebral cortex or the cerebrum. Okay, and here frontal lobe is the main one. Frontal lobe is occupying the major space here, isn't it? This part. So this is involved in attention, memory, thinking, learning, reasoning, logical thinking, all those things. Most of the cognitive functions are dealt with or processed by the frontal lobe. Yes, parietal lobe, they are mainly concerned with visual and auditory sensation. Mainly auditory, visual sensations, auditory sensations. Here, processing of auditory information occurs in temporal lobes. I told you it's present near our ears, isn't it? So processing of information, not just coordination. Here it is coordination with visual and auditory sensation, but auditory information is processed. Process means if you hear something, if you have to understand what that is, if you want to comprehend what that audio message is, then you require the help of temporal lobe. Okay, so the processing happens in the temporal lobe. For auditory functions, the processing always happens for the in the temporal lobe. And apart from the processing of auditory information, temporal lobe has one more function, that is memory for symbolic sounds and words. Memory for symbolic sounds and words. Yes. Just a minute. Yes, Abhinav, you were asking something.
Yes, ma'am. What is parietal lobe, ma'am?
What lobe?
Ma'am, parietal.
Parietal lobe. Parietal lobe. I'll tell you. Oops, I missed this word, no? Cutaneous sensations means the sensations related to the skin, the touch sensation. Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. So parietal lobe is another lobe, that is this part, this yellowish part that you can see. That's the lobe of another lobe of the brain. It is mainly concerned with this cutaneous sensation, which means the touch sensation. Touch sensation, we have to feel something, right? And when somebody touches you, or when you touch on something, you have to process that information in the brain, that it is this thing, or it is a harmful stimulus, or it is an unharmful stimulus. Okay, so for that you require the parietal lobe. That's the main function of parietal lobe. But along with that, they coordinate visual and auditory sensations also. Just coordinate, not full processing, just coordinate the visual and auditory sensations. Now, these auditory sensations are processed by temporal lobe, visual sensations are processed by occipital lobe, basically. Okay, and parietal lobe is the one who coordinates both the functions. That's all. Understood?
Ma'am, visual, which ma'am visual?
Visual is occipital that we are going to see. Okay. The last one. Okay, so here the main function is visual. Here it is auditory. And here it is touch sensation. Okay. And as I told you, all these functions are not completely dependent on one particular lobe. They are like classmates. Consider for, or maybe for the team members of a project group. The whole processing of the information is the project topic, and if you have 4 members in a group, if one person cannot do properly, you'll obviously help, isn't it? Because the success of the project depends on 4 of you. Yes. So if parietal lobe has some problems in coordination, then somebody else will take over. Okay. So because we have the frontal lobe to carry on the main functions, the main cognitive functions here. Okay. So there are connections between these 4 lobes. Again, just like the 2 hemispheres of the brain, these lobes also have connections. And please remember, these 4 lobes are in the hemispheres. Okay, so in the left hemisphere as well as the right hemisphere, we have parts of the parietal, frontal, occipital as well as the temporal lobe. Understood? Okay. Yes. So again, we were talking about temporal lobe that is primarily concerned with processing of auditory information. Here it is just coordination. Parietal lobe is just coordination, but the main processing happens in temporal lobe. Then memory for symbolic sounds and words resides here. When you are making too much of noise, I say shh. I just say shh. What does that mean?
Keep silent.
Keep silence or maintain silence. Okay, that's not a complete word, isn't it? You heard a sound shh, that's it. But then you understood that you have to maintain silence. That is one type of symbolic sounds. So the memory for this, the memory for symbolic sounds and all is processed, or it's dealt with, or it resides in the temporal lobe of our brain. Okay, memory for symbolic sounds and words. Understanding of speech and written language. That is also one function, depends on this lobe. Understanding of speech and written language. You know, when you're sitting in class, if I'm not me, somebody else is taking class and you're very much bored, and one of your friends just writes in a chit and passes a message to you. Maybe just how are you? Is the class boring or something like that? You have to read and understand that, isn't it? Yes, that is also dependent on this temporal lobe. Understanding of speech, that is something that somebody else speaks, and also one's related to the written language. So speech is obviously related to auditory information, right? And temporal lobe plays the major role in processing of auditory information. So that is already understood. But written language is also dependent on the temporal lobe. Okay. Now, the last one is occipital lobe. Occipital lobe is mainly concerned with visual information.
It's connected with eyes, you know.
Yes. It is believed that interpretation of visual impulses or visual stimulus, memory for visual stimuli, and color visual orientation is performed by this lobe. Everything related to our vision, that is color, then memory for visual stimuli. That is, if you have seen a person and you have not talked with them, you have just met them before. That is, only visual information is present. Now, if you have to remember the next time that person's face, or if you have to actually remember this is the person that you met last time, then you need the help of occipital lobe. Then to process that this is the person, that is process the visual stimulus also, you need the help of this lobe, occipital lobe. Occipital lobe is mainly dealing with the, or concerned with the visual information that you get from the environment. Interpretation of visual impulses, that is processing of visual impulses or visual information or visual stimuli. Then memory for that, memory for visual stimuli. Then color visual orientation. Everything is performed by this lobe. You can add one more thing in frontal lobe. Personality is dealt with by the frontal lobe. Okay, so there are 4 lobes of the cerebral cortex or the cerebrum. That is frontal lobe, parietal lobe, temporal lobe, and occipital lobe. The main functions of them, the frontal lobe is concerned with all the major cognitive functions. Okay, attention, thinking, memory, learning, reasoning, everything, personality, then all those things. But parietal lobe, it is specified for basically the touch sensation, but along with that, coordination of visual and auditory sensations are also there. Then temporal lobe, it's present near the ears. So obviously it has to play a role in the auditory functioning. So it processes auditory information. Then occipital lobe's main function is related to the visual stimuli, visual processing of information. Okay, that's about the lobes of the brain. This is the picture. Yes. So when we look from one side, this is the structure. On the other side also we have the other half, isn't it? So for left in hemispheres, we have these, what do you call, the lobes of the brain. Okay. Yes, that is about the cerebrum. Yes, it's done. Okay. So from the beginning, we talked about the whole cerebrum. That is a part of forebrain. Always remember, we have divided the brain into three: hindbrain, midbrain, and forebrain. Cerebrum occupies the major part of the whole brain, not only forebrain, but the whole brain occupies the major mass of the brain, human brain. And it is also known as cerebral cortex. So if you read somewhere a cerebral cortex or cerebrum, both are the same. Cerebral cortex as well as cerebrum. Then yes, 2/3 of total mass of human brain that we already saw. Then thickness 1.5 mm to 4 mm. Then what else? Yes, the two hemispheres of the brain, left hemisphere as well as the right hemisphere. Okay. And they are connected by a structure called corpus callosum. In between, they have a bridge called corpus callosum. And basically, if left brain is dominant, that means the person will be very much good in science, mathematics, language, and so on. Always remember left for language and logic. Language is also present here. If left hemisphere is dominant, then that means you are very much good in language oriented things, science, mathematics, the logical thinking, and so on. But if it is the right hemisphere that is dominant, then you are good in artistic skills. You are better at arts, creative thinking, imagination, intuition, rhythm, that is related to music and dance, holistic thinking, all those things. Then, yeah, we talked about left hemisphere and right hemisphere. Then the connection, that is corpus callosum. Then this is the structure, corpus callosum. This is the connection between the left hemisphere as well as the right hemisphere. Okay. And finally, the lobes of the brain, the 4 lobes of the brain. I think only this much information is given regarding the lobes of the brain. Please check the textbook. Page number 51. Okay. Now, everybody switch on your videos. Emlyn, do you have the textbook?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Can you read the last paragraph in that? After lobes.
Psychologists and psychologists have tried to identify
Physiologists and psychologists.
Physiologists and psychologists have tried to identify specific functions associated with the special brain structure. They have found that no activities of brain is performed only by the single part of the context. Normally, other parts are involved, but it is always correct that there is some localization of function. Is, for example, particular function. A particular part of a context plays an important role more than the other parts. For example, if you are driving a car, you see the road and other vehicles by the function of occipital lobes, hear the horns by the function of temporary lobes, and do many motor activities controlled by the parietal lobes, and make decision by the help of the front lobe. This whole brain acts as a well-coordinated unit in which different parts contribute their functions separately.
Okay. So the point that this paragraph focuses on is there is localization of function in the brain, which means one particular function might be localized to some part of the brain, but it doesn't mean that the other parts do not help in it. Okay. So what is the example given here? If you're driving the car, then you can see the other cars and the pedestrians and all because of your occipital lobe, because that is the a lobe of the brain which has major role in processing of visual information. Okay, then you can hear the sound of the horns from the other vehicles because of the temporal lobe, because that has a major function in auditory processing of information. Okay, then what else is given? Yes. And many other motor activities is controlled by parietal lobe. That is, when you're driving or when you're riding, you have to catch that. You have to hold on to the gear. You have to hold on to several other things in the car as well as the bike, isn't it? If you're riding, yes, you have to feel it. That sensation is there. You have to know what all those things are. And motor movements also, they are also carried on by the parietal lobe. Now, to coordinate all this, if you have to drive or if you have to ride, you have to maintain your attention. You have to think and decide if you have to turn left, if you have to turn right or not, isn't it? Yes. So all these is coordinated by the the main lobe, but the lobe that occupies a major part, that is a frontal lobe. Okay, so it's not that all the functions are completely dependent on one particular lobe, but there is localization of function. Localization of function means one function might be related to a particular lobe. The prominent role or the dominance is for that particular lobe then. For example, for auditory function, it is temporal lobe, like that. Okay, that is the difference. Okay, now I want you all to take the starting section of central nervous system, CNS. Whatever you wrote in the lecture note, just go through all the parts. Connect it and just reach the lobes finally. We have spinal cord remaining to discuss in the central nervous system, which we'll do in the next class, but see the brain as such.
In the grand scheme of things, there aren't many ordinary people who have names remembered by history.
Till what time is the class?
9:20.
9:20. Okay. Please finish fast and we'll watch a video. Attendance, please. Abdul, Abhinav, present. Alina Jason.
Present, ma'am.
Alina Varghese. Anila.
Yes, ma'am.
Devika,
Present, ma'am.
Emmeline,
Present, ma'am.
Eva, present. Malavika, Mary Angelina, present.
Ma'am.
Meryl,
Ma'am, Malavik. Present.
yes. Meryl, present. Rose, present. Shreya, present. Abhiram, Abhiram is absent. Abhijit,
Present, ma'am.
Bilash,
Present, ma'am.
Amal Roshan,
Present, ma'am.
Rosary, Kevin,
Ma'am, Kevin said he has some internet issues.
okay. Omar is absent. Sanam,
Present.
you're sleepy.
I know, ma'am.
Sandra, Sandra is absent. Sanjana present. Nestle present. Okay. Have you completed reading? Okay. What happened is this iron rod went through his head, but still after that he remained conscious, and after removing all this his personality changed. It was because his frontal lobe was affected. Okay, frontal lobe was the one that was affected, and he was a very calm person, very kind and calm person, but he became very aggressive. His friends and acquaintances say that he has turned out to be an animal. Okay, that's what happened. All right, let's wind up the class. I think we'll meet after Onam, right? Okay, so happy Onam in advance.
Happy Onam, ma'am.
Yes, thank you.
Happy Onam, ma'am.